to Screen Preach for episode 20. Welcome back, everybody. And by everybody, of course, I mean the 5 people who consistently watch. Thank you. Everyone else. Wow, that's actually pretty fucked up. I think my dad is one of the people who doesn't keep up with the show. And now he's gonna hate me for saying it on the show. But watch the fucking show, Dad. What's going on? All right. All right, let's do it. Let's talk about movies today in the name of the Godfather, the Son of Odin, and the Holy Jedi. Another interesting week. And by interesting week, I mean boring. Nah, it's fine. There's a good spot, over here at Griffith Park. There's a good spot to lay out, just take in the sun. So I've been doing that a lot more lately, and it's nice. Keeps my mind off things. I think I fixed my mic, and I don't just mean this. This thing is, I like this. This thing is way too tight. It needs to be way looser. I should be able to move it right here, right next to me, right now. Just nice and easy. It's fucking, I have to really, pull on it to get it to fucking... last week, for audio listeners, I know that most of you I don't think many people even use the podcast app to listen. They use YouTube, they watch it. So you didn't tell the difference. Maybe you did a little bit, but I lost the last 3 minutes last week of audio. If you listen to it on Apple Podcasts, the last 3 minutes cuts out and there's no sound. It's because that moment where I was talking about the mic last week and I pulled on it, apparently I hit something because it stopped recording the audio. I don't know what happened, and I checked the video a few times to see how the fuck could I have hit the mute button, because that's all I can think of. It had to have been the mute button. There's no way I unplugged these. I checked them a million times. There's no, it had to have been the mute button. And still, though, I don't know how I could have hit the mute button. From now on, I'm just going to not fucking touch it when I'm recording. Let's just be safe that way. My computer has to fucking remind me every week that I have, this much space left on the hard drive, which is bullshit, because I use an external hard drive, which has at least another 300 gigabytes on it, so I don't know why it's fucking saying that. I set up Time Machine so that they pull from that, and they everything's to that. So why is it telling me about my disk? You got disk problems? Go to the fucking external. Do what you're supposed to do and go to the external. You know what I mean? This computer's gonna be the death of me. I need a new computer, that's for sure. That'll make a world of difference. I'd like to get a camera too. I could record with the camera, can have my phone while I'm recording here. It would make looking up the news easier. I can even look shit up while I'm, that would be nice. And then I can edit the fucking episodes on my computer like a normal person instead of on my phone like I do every week. Yes, on my fucking phone. That's how I edit. Alright, so, cool. Cool. Everything's cool. What do we do at this point? We talk about what I've been watching and shit. I've been watching the same stuff. Nothing's really that different. Well, no, I'm doing a lot of movies. Rewatching some movies. I think I mentioned that. I watched The Fighter, Silver Linings Playbook, and American Hustle, which are David O. Russell's films. I watched my favorite Aaron Sorkin movies, A Few Good Men, Social Network, Moneyball, Steve Jobs, and Molly's Game was the latest. That was that was a good one. That one's good. Yeah, I'm just kind of watching a movie a night right now, and the rest of the day I just write I write and write and write and read, which you know what I'm reading. If you can see right there, I'm fucking going all out here. I'm gonna do a little video on YouTube, show my Legends collection for Star Wars, which is cool. I think I got quite something going on over here. Is it absurd? Is it ridiculous? Is it over the top? You might ask. You'll probably say yes, but I won't, because fuck it. It's been fun to collect, and it's even more fun to read. I'm like really caught up in one of the books right now that it's good. I'm still watching Yellowstone every week. It's getting better, but it's building nice. Season's building, progressing to a certain point that they always come to, which is a full-on threat to their land, and they have to fight whoever's threatening their land. It's a good show, man. Watch that show. People keep telling me to try Perry Mason again. I will. All right. I just haven't gotten around to it. I feel like is there more that I'm missing? What else is there? There's not. No. Let's talk about news, because there is some interesting news, and it's better than me trying to figure out or tell you what you should be watching. The big one right now is Yellowstone. You should be watching that. So right here, our latest, the Hawkeye TV series officially recruited directors, comedic directors, who did Troop Zero and Comrade Detective. I don't know what those are, and I don't know the directors, but okay, that's some latest on Hawkeye. There's been some stuff about, there's been some news with the Marvel TV shows this week, so I'll get into that. Jurassic World Dominion set photos were leaked or whatever, and check them out right here. I guess there's going to be some kind of snowy plane crash scene or sequence, so who knows what's going on there. The Russo brothers, this is a big one that they announced yesterday. The Russo brothers are to direct Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans in an assassin thriller for Netflix, and it's supposedly going to have a $200 million budget, which is supposedly the biggest budget that Netflix has ever had for a movie. It's $50 million more than The Irishman, which was Scorsese, and it's relatively more than the budget for Da 5 Bloods that Spike Lee did for Netflix, which is what I will be talking about today. Spike Lee's latest on Netflix, Da 5 Bloods. But yeah, I mean, the Russo brothers are reuniting with Chris Evans, Captain America. The Russo brothers directed the Avengers movies. And Ryan Gosling. This sounds pretty interesting already, with the cast and the directors and what, assassin thriller? Yeah, sign me up. So that's cool. Been watching more of Netflix's movies lately. I mean, how can you not? When there's no theaters, you kind of start to branch. You have to watch when you're bored and you're like, okay, what can I? Give me a new movie. Netflix does have a bunch, even Amazon, HBO. Hulu doesn't do original movies, do they? They plenty of original series, but I don't know, but they don't do original movies. If they do, I haven't heard of them really, and I mean, I definitely haven't seen them. So, yeah, they're not in that they're not in that game. They're not playing that game. Disney Plus, I think they do original movies for sure. Yeah. Huh. So speaking of that Marvel news, they officially delayed Falcon and Winter Soldier. It was supposed to come out in August. Yes, literally we were this close to having the first Marvel TV series from directly from Marvel Studios, I should say. We've had Marvel TV series. We've had the Netflix heroes like Daredevil and Jessica Jones, of course. We have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is in its final season. But they don't connect directly to the movies enough. These shows do, just based alone on who they're about. Falcon and Winter Soldier is about Falcon and Winter Soldier. We were gonna have Black Widow and Falcon and Winter Soldier at this point, literally and now it's been nothing. The break is good. I still think the break is good. It gives more of a, okay, Infinity Saga ended. It kind of builds hype for a longer period. What's coming next? What is this next saga? It's a good thing. We've never had a break like this from Marvel, so it's probably good because of how much Marvel we're exposed to constantly. To have a little break like this, it can't be a bad thing. When it comes back, we're all gonna be fucking, assuming everything's normal again. They could fucking go. The box office numbers for their movies could be insane, assuming we're back to normal. Because the hype is just building. But no Falcon and Winter Soldier. It was gonna be literally in a few weeks. It's crazy to think about. It's probably still it's still gonna be a fall. I would think that it would be out in maybe September or October or whatever. If we're really lucky, it comes out in October when Mandalorian Season 2 comes out. So we have both of those at the same time. A lot of fun TV all at once. But yeah, that's where we're at. And it's not like they officially confirmed it. They announced their summer rollout of series, and Falcon and Winter Soldier wasn't on the list, so naturally they're not coming out now in August. I guess they just didn't get around to finishing that final week of filming that they have. Or if they did, then now they're editing it and they don't have enough time to get it out in August. But it'll be soon, I would think. And then I saw this latest trailer that looks interesting. I think it's a Netflix movie. Netflix movie. So we're talking about Netflix originals. Here's a Netflix movie with Jamie Foxx and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And the concept looks very interesting. I love when they take the superhero concept and put a unique spin on it, do something totally different. This is some idea someone had and wrote a script and brought it to Netflix. That's ideal. You can do that these days. If you have a story, I fucking wish I knew how. 'Cause I have stories. How do I get it to Netflix? How do I shop it to Netflix? Someone tell me. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? Tell me. Fuck. This idea. It's like a world where there's a pill and you take the pill and it either kills you or it gives you some unique superpower. And it becomes like a black market thing. Obviously, the underworld selling this drug, this pill, becomes and then I guess Jamie Foxx is like a mercenary and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's a cop, and they team up. I don't know. It looks interesting. So that's something I'll probably watch and maybe even talk about for an episode. I think it's called Pure Power or something. What the fuck is it called? Project Power. So Project Power, and it comes out on my birthday, August 14th, on Netflix. Check that one out. And then I want to check out this new documentary Netflix is doing. It's called Fear City. There's a trailer for it, but it's New York versus the Mafia, and it's documentary entirely covering the history of New York's control over New York, the Mafia's control over New York, which I know every bit about. Trust me, I'm like an encyclopedia for that shit. Because I read this, I just did one of my latest projects. I just did so much research on it. And even before that, I had to strong interest in it, so I just kind of know a lot about that stuff. But I'd love to see if there's things I didn't know, so I always check out new docs on it or whatever. Um, so that looks interesting too. David Dobkin, director. So I think it was a few weeks ago I mentioned how Pineapple Express, there's an idea for a sequel, and I was like, what about the Wedding Crashers sequel, which they've talked about for years? And then David Dobkin, the director's got to tease us a little bit this latest week. He talks about an idea he has for Wedding Crashers, for a sequel. It would have to be the right time, the right script, all that stuff, but it's possible. He said the idea would focus on our Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson's characters, John and Jeremy. It would focus on them being all of a sudden single in their 40s after failed marriages to the girls we came to know in the first movie. And then all of a sudden trying to navigate what it's like being 40 and single, which David Dobkin said he that's the idea because it's relatable. People go through that in real life all the time. They're all of a sudden single in their 40s. There is an interesting and probably funny story in there somewhere. But moving on, he's just teasing us a little bit. That would be great though. That's such a funny movie. A couple of Marvel things swirling, like Captain Marvel 2 potentially featuring flashbacks to the time jump after Infinity War. Yes, I think structure this a certain way, it's interesting. There's a 5-year gap in between Infinity War and most of Endgame. A lot happened in that time period, including Captain Marvel becoming an official Avenger in that. 5 years. There was a lot there's a lot of story in there. Like, even Hulk's story of how he became Smart Hulk, Bruce's story of becoming Smart Hulk. There's a whole bunch of stories still in that 5 years that they can play with if they want. Especially if in that 5 years there are plot points that get set up that help this next saga, whatever it is. I was thinking the other day, what if it's in the 5-year jump that the Mutant X gene or whatever, something with X-Men, what if it happened in the 5-year gap? What if the snap caused some kind of genetic mutation? I don't know. I feel like in the 5-year gap, there's still a lot to work with. And I think they knew that. I think they know what they're doing. They can play with that little jump to help their story as it grows now in the next saga. So that's one thing. Another thing is I think this might be happening. Disney is ready to lock down Tom Holland as Spider-Man for 6 more movies. Yes, get it done. Sony, work on it. Fucking get it done. The guy needs to lead. He needs to be one of the main Avengers in this saga. Don't fuck with us. Get it done. As you know, they almost lost Spider-Man. They got him back. 2-movie deal. So right now it's Spider-Man 3 and another Avengers movie. That's it. But I also heard they're back at the table and renegotiating. Make this happen. 6-movie deal. Make it fucking happen. Then you can do whatever you want, especially if Marvel is working out some kind of multiverse storyline. There's plenty to work with there, including a Spider-Man multiverse, a Spider-Verse. I'd like to think Venom and Morbius and all these Sony movies, they exist in their own little cornerstone, their own little Marvel Cinematic Universe multiverse. Like some other reality where the movies are not as good. I'm going to talk about Venom in a couple of weeks because I only saw it once originally when it came out, so I finally saw it for a second time. Figured let's talk about it, and I'll break down what's, I'll get into that. One of the biggest things this week was they announced a new Star Wars TV show. So if you do avidly follow the story and you've watched all the storylines, that means Clone Wars and Rebels and all that, there is a new animated show coming out on Disney Plus next year that follows up on a crew of clones that we met in the Clone Wars called the Bad Batch, and it's a story about them navigating the galaxy after Order 66 and during the early days of the Empire. A lot of potential there. So it's a show that takes place in between Clone Wars and Rebels, and it focuses on this group of clones that probably defect and do not follow through with Order 66. We now know there were a few clones who didn't follow through with Order 66, like Rex and his comrades that we meet in Rebels also. So this is cool, and definitely, it's called The Bad Batch, and it's about them. They probably maybe they become Imperial troopers first, and then they defect. I'm curious where they start the story off, but we'll see. So that's next year, and that's Disney Plus, and that's awesome. And then Giancarlo Esposito, who has Breaking Bad star and Mandalorian now, he's all about tackling different areas of cinema right now, and he said he wants to tackle Marvel next. Who can you see Giancarlo Esposito playing? A villain, a hero? Who? That would be awesome. I'm brainstorming. He wants to. He said it's a clear next step for me to tackle Marvel. Could he be Professor X? Could he be Magneto? That's interesting. What's interesting about it is not so much I can see him for either of those roles, but who do you cast to be the opposing character to his? What dynamic do you see there? If he's Professor X, who's Magneto, and vice versa? That's interesting to think about. Who do you cast opposite Giancarlo Esposito? If it's those two characters, obviously it could be anybody, but and then Jerry Maguire, actress, she's in John Travolta's wife. She's in a bunch of shit. Dude, Kelly Preston passed away, so that was some latest. Also, the Glee actress they found dead and shit. That was fucking crazy. I'm sorry that I'm blanking on her name. I didn't know her. I didn't watch Glee so I kind of just saw it quickly earlier this week, and I kind of missed the name. But rest in peace to her too, obviously. That's fucking tragic that she was young. Like, that's different than, like, I mean, yeah. So that's I think that's the news of the week. Yeah. So that's cool. We're gonna move on. We're gonna move on and talk. I hope this is recording. I don't see, because if it's broken, that's a different story, and that's a problem. We're not broken now, right? Picking all this up, right? Let's move on and talk about our movie this week, which is Da 5 Bloods. Spike Lee's latest. Bloods don't die, we multiply, is a line said throughout the film. Recurring line. Give me some fucking zoom in on this text. I can't read this. Jesus Christ. Yeah, so that's a recurring line. They say, our protagonists in the film, it's kind of like a mantra and a code that they have for their brotherhood. What's most powerful about it is that it can be attributed to all black people and the way they unite to fight against injustice in this country. So that's what I thought was really, really powerful about that line that they say. And once we get into what the movie's really about, it makes sense. Thus, anyone else who joins that fight against injustice can consider themselves a blood. Every time there's an act of injustice in this country, an innocent black life, or blood, if you will, taken from us, the natural reaction is a multiplication of black lives or bloods that face that injustice head on. Think about how black lives unite and how we all unite. Anyone who joins the fight, I think blood can be attributed. Bloods don't die, we multiply. It's a great line, a recurring line. So there's spoilers ahead for this movie. If you haven't seen it yet, it's on Netflix now. So go check it out. And Netflix, to follow up Scorsese's Irishman with a Spike Lee film. Thumbs up to that. And keep going in the direction you're going with this. I don't know how it works. I really don't. To have the budgets they do now for some of these movies. I just mentioned that $200 million budget for Gosling Evans movie. I don't know how it works. How are you making that? How you profit? I don't know how it works with the streaming, man. I'd like to think that I guess it's all subscriptions that pay for this shit, but it's crazy to think that without an actual official box office, they pulled this off. I remember reading years ago that like they don't pay it off. They're in like that they're in debt and shit. Like I don't know what's. Hey, it at the end of the day though, we're getting some great films. Still don't like their format with not releasing these to be purchased. I think Netflix should release their films that way at a certain point. Some people like to collect. Me. Like, release The Irishman, for fuck's sake. I'd like to own it, you know? I'd like to own this one. I mean, what the fuck, dude? Whatever. Spoilers ahead. We're going to talk about story first. We can talk about structure right off the bat, too. The inciting action is clear. It happens right away when the Bloods reunite. In the hotel room, they all reunite. And the key incident is simply learning what they are reuniting for. So they're back in Vietnam after all these years. So the story is about Vietnam vets years later. A core of African American guys who fought in the war. And they reunite. They go back to Nam. This is, I think it's modern day too. It's 2019, 2020 something. And they're reuniting. So the key incident is learning what they're reuniting for. Their mission is presented to us. So specifically the flashback of that main battle where they find the gold, that's the key incident. That's telling us what it is they're there to retrieve, what they're reuniting for. I guess that's the first real flashback sequence too. They find the gold, and then from there the resistance to the call to action here is expressed through the initial conflict trying to, people and sources trying to stop them from going on their mission. So there's a few different things that early on, before they even start journeying into the jungle, there's things that keep them from things that are trying to stop them from going. That's the initial resistance, the initial conflict. This is when we learn of the mental trauma and inner demons of our heroes. They're all broken in some way, so much so this gold thereafter begins to threaten their very brotherhood. When it becomes about achieving personal wealth and causing them to turn on each other at multiple times throughout the story. So greed does come into it. They do have these moments where they're like fighting each other. And if Norman is this like centerpiece of it all. It's like he was like the glue that held them together. If he represents the entire fight for freedom against injustice in this story, the story on the surface becomes about finding the love again, as they put it a couple times in the movie. That same love that Norman inspired in all of them, right? The story underneath is clear. What Lee is trying to say thematically. The Vietnam War, perhaps more so than any other war we've been in, challenged the idea of freedom and the things worth fighting for. Arguably, right? People can argue that point, but I'm saying it for the purpose of this analysis. We were fighting in Nam because we felt a need to protect our freedoms and philosophies and beliefs. The main theme of oppression and injustice are represented in the way Lee expresses the hard truth of black men who fought in Vietnam. And fought for that very freedom that they don't even have when they get back home, right? So it's a powerful message, powerful. They fought for an America where freedom is meant to be embodied, and yet it doesn't even exist for them. And this is nothing new. That there's a real, one of my favorite things about the movie. It has these like historical cutaways with real footage and real photos and shit like that. There's one early on where there's a social injustice like rally or something, and one of them, some guy speaking about it, And he says it's every war. That every war it was always about fighting for our beliefs and our freedoms. And every time black people would fight in a war, they'd come home and they don't get the same freedom in return. So it's really, really pushed. That idea is really pushed with the Vietnam War, and so it was naturally the centerpiece of his story was the Vietnam War. It doesn't even exist for them. The country they're over there fighting for won't fight for them. The point of framing the story in two timelines is to make this idea even more clear. Is to express and show that the freedom they were promised is still not given in the present day. So the dual plots is important. And then there's this MacGuffin of, you can call it a MacGuffin of the gold, right? Kind of like it kind of reminds me of like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction a little bit. And it acts as a symbolic piece of that freedom, the gold. It's labeled upon its discovery as the key to fighting injustice, aiding the cause. It's said multiple times, aiding freedom, and thus the idea that it was left behind and couldn't provide that aid. So the fact that it was left behind, it didn't do what it was supposed to. It didn't fulfill its purpose. The obtaining of it many years later is the expression of hope for being able to do that. So they go back to retrieve this gold, and it's and deep down it's in the hope that it will aid the cause like it was always meant to do. Assuming the very presence of Vietnam, or their presence in it, and the presence of greed doesn't destroy our heroes first. So that's what they're battling with. They're battling exterior conflicts, of course. They're also battling their inner demons. And just being in Vietnam brings them back to that time, and it brings it out of them, you know. Brings their inner demons out more. And yes, it does end up helping the cause in the end. So when we get to the end, it does aid the cause. So that was important to have at the end. I also liked the similarities pointed out between the two sides that fought. So, like, even in Vietnam, similar racism and judgment and conflict exists. So, there's this moment when Otis, the character of Otis, meets his daughter for the first time. And she's a grown woman. And there was fear of persecution that kept Tien, his lover and his daughter's mother, from telling Otis the truth. She feared scrutiny in her own country. As she puts it, she dated she slept with the black GI, and apparently that is something that happened and that Vietnamese women did have to wrestle with in their own society in Vietnam. It's something that would similarly happen in the States too. Like, there would be judgment. There's judgment in the States for interracial. It's just like it's touching on that point about interracial marriages and just unions in general. I don't know how right I am about that idea, but the point, though, is that it tells us that both sides that fought in the Vietnam War were victims in some way. Like, there's a brief moment that I really liked when they shared drinks with former Vietnam vets from the other side, which expresses the idea as well. Like, they all move on past the war as one, even though they all fought each other and killed people. That I mean, it's just a powerful moment. To think that it's possible that those guys they shared a drink with could have killed someone that they knew and cared about. It's the trials of war. So, like I said, my favorite part about this movie is the cutaways. The historical aspects are heightened with Lee's expressing of the true moments. So these cutaways, he shows us real heroes who died in the war. And I do think our performers here do a great job embodying characters who have been through it, who have fought in that war and been through it and dealt with all the same problems that someone in real life would have dealt with. like I said, they're all broken in some way, and I think as the story goes on, you see too that it's this place. Vietnam, as an entirety, or as an entity, if you will, brings them face to face with their demons. Maybe they're running away from those demons normally back home, but here they have to face them. Being back in Vietnam, it just brings it out of them. Structurally, we'll talk again. I like to think the true start at the end of Act 1 is when they actually start to journey through Vietnam, the waters first and then the jungles. But really, I think the true start is when David shows up, and here's why. It's because of who David represents. There's a bigger representation to David, the character of David. He's a much more important character than you initially realize. So here's the thing. So in many ways, David becomes the fifth blood in this group, right? It's called the Five Bloods. He in a way represents the Norman character. The story focuses most on Paul. I would say Paul is the main character, probably. Paul is the protagonist in many ways. It focuses on him most, on his relationship with Norman, and on his relationship with his son David. So you see the parallels. Another way to think about it is when we initially see our Five Bloods, it's one young man and four old men because of the way it's filmed, which I thought was really brilliant and creative on Lee's part. And even though they were obviously all young together, that's not how we see them, like I said. And the reason is it's to parallel to the main plot, our main plot bloods. So our Five Bloods in the main plot, it's the same thing. It's one young man, now David, instead of Norman, and four old guys. So this has a lot of meaning symbolically. Paul is the most broken of these vets. It's because of the guilt he has for accidentally killing Norman, something we learn later. If Paul is on this journey for any single reason, it's to face that guilt, to face his demons. For Paul, Norman replaced any attachments he might have had for his son, which I think is something he says a couple times too. So he failed David because of his guilt over Norman. Repairing this failure is also part of the story. It's Paul's recognition that brings the story full circle. His letter to David at the end. A letter he wrote before leaving. So he wrote it technically in the beginning before leaving, which tells us he realized many times before that he failed his son, allowing Norman's ghost to overshadow any chance he would have at being like an actual good father to David. So you could say, in many ways, Paul came to this jungle again to die. To die where it all started, very possibly. He prepared for that very possibility, too. It's why he wrote the letter. Then there's the broadcast, so we're still talking structurally. I think the broadcast revealing Martin Luther King's assassination is meant to be a key moment in many ways. It acts too as a potential true start to the film. I don't know. It's a long movie, so it probably takes on big movie structure, but I don't know 100%. There's a lot of good plot points. There's more than usual. There's a good amount of plot points. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly where all the main plot points are, but that could have been a true start to the film. It expresses the truth most clearly of what it was like for black soldiers fighting in Vietnam, so that's why it could be the true start. In that scene, too, Norman represents Dr. King, and the other Bloods represent more Malcolm X, and I just mean in terms of their perspectives on the assassination. Like, think about it. Martin Luther King was a man of peace. Norman tried to maintain the peace in that moment, and the other four guys wanted to fucking take an aggressive approach, which is more like the perspectives of Malcolm X. So I thought that was interesting. The reversal of the film was clear enough to me. It's when they find the gold and Norman's body. Only because there's a clear unraveling after that. People trying to fucking get the gold from them. And it becomes like a war all over again, too. It gets fucking brutal and violent. As violence picks up after that, it becomes more constant. They fight for this gold, um, and uh, and to express that, we've entered a turning point in the film. So to express that it's a turning point into a violent unraveling, we have a clear moment of turning point, which is that one of the Bloods dies. So Eddie is blown up by a mine, and Jesus Christ, that fucking mine sequence is unbelievable, ridiculous, totally brutal. Um, but that's like the official start of the unraveling. It's when we really get that line again too. Bloods don't die, we multiply. It's like the first really powerful moment they say it. Um, and then what happens right after that line? The Lamb crew. So the mine people, the French people who come and try to deactivate mines to help save lives, prevent what literally fucking happens right before they show up. They show up literally right after Eddie's blown up, and in many ways they become Bloods. So right after that line, it's like Bloods don't die, we multiply. Then the Lamb crew comes and they end up becoming allies in the film. So in many ways, there that multiplication is expressed. It actually happens. And yeah, that mine the mining fuck man, the mine sequence was when David steps on it and then they pull him off with the rope. Holy shit, dude. So the thematic connections were really good. It's important that it's David who finds the gold because, like I said, David represents Norman in a lot of ways, and it was Norman who found the gold the first time around, so it makes sense. Well, he at least, I mean, he made the plan to bury it. I mean, I guess they all found it at the same time, but he made the plan to bury it. And then from there, it's David. David finds himself in a near-death scenario with the mines, and for Paul, it's like a chance to save Norman. So yeah, so like when David's like about to, and he's on the mine, and if he steps off, he's gonna fucking get blown up. In many ways, that was symbolically representing the idea of Paul actually having a second chance at saving a personification of Norman, which is his own son. Paul then does what he must. It's again like it's about him facing his demons. So naturally he goes off, and he faces those. He goes off on his own after like he turns on everybody because he's broken and his mind doesn't. He's corrupted because of being in Vietnam. He says it to David at one point. He says being in this place, it makes him even more. It makes him worse than he probably is back home fighting these demons. So I think the natural thing for him to do, and he does it there, is he goes off on his own to face those demons. And I would consider that probably a pinch point because it leads to the down and out moment at the end of Act 2, which is Paul's murder. So Paul is killed, but it's also it's a main plot point because he also faces a visualization of Norman. He faces Norman, and he gets forgiveness right before his death. So, very powerful and very symbolic. Definitely a plot point and probably the end of Act 2, I would say. And it's a down and out because we lose Paul. And I think there's a lot of thematic connections. David has guilt over things. Guilt over, I guess he feels like he betrays his father in the moments before Paul's death. So there's guilt there. It's supposed to connect to his father's own guilt. The reaffirmation is that they plan to fight back. The climax is our shoot 'em up action moment at the temple. And the film ends with the most important message of all as we return home to see the fight continues there. The fight against injustice. And thus the closing image is Martin Luther King's speech, leaving us with the most important themes. So I think thematically, the progression of the story thematically was spot on. And then I want to talk visually for a second in terms of directions. I mean, it's Spike Lee. We got to talk about his direction and his creative choices. I really loved how he framed the various timelines. So it's how in this film we know when we're in one time and then another. So to make it clear that we're in a flashback or a main timeline, he literally right in front of us changes the frame. So the main plot, which is the modern day, is filmed and framed within our conventional modern day wide lens, right? But even more than that, I loved how we actually get to so we get to see the frame switch. We get that like old school 30 millimeter like tiny frame for the flashbacks, and with grainy like exposure to make it look old school. And then it's just regular wide clear HD for the main timeline. But he actually like in the moment changes the frame. Like we see it's an animation that we actually get to see the frames change, and like right as they're changing from in between plots, which I thought was awesome. Really, really cool. Really creative. And even the handheld camera moments. So there's a few handheld like old school camera moments where someone in the crew is actually filming, and that has its own frame too. Which the way he distinguishes the different frames was really really cool. So that was visually creative, something I thought I had to point out. Another thing is that the Vietnam flashbacks have a look and feel of old Vietnam War movies. So not just like looking like film from the time, like from the war, people filming it, but also movies about Vietnam in the past. It has that feel. It feels like an old Vietnam movie and a new Vietnam movie at the same time. Stylistically, it makes you feel more like you're in the genre of a Vietnam War movie. One other really important thing I want to point out, Lee is framing a story within a much larger historical context. So one of oppression and injustice. One of my favorite things he did visually was he took us on a historical journey by intercutting pictures, videos, and moments from real life that further enlighten the audience on this specific history, as I've mentioned. He takes us down historical. It ends up being a historical journey as much as there's this other story going on. Performances, in terms of the performances and the actors, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to watch Clark Peters on screen again. I have watched him on screen since The Wire. Then again, that's just the last thing I happen to see him in. And Jonathan Majors, I didn't even know he was in this, and then he ends up being a main character. I loved him in The Last Black Man in San Francisco, so it was great to have him in this. He plays a totally different kind of character, too. He's a great actor. Chadwick Boseman is just a special place in my heart for Chadwick Boseman, because I'm a big Marvel fan. But Chadwick Boseman is always awesome to see on screen. He's always great. And especially when his character, like in this film, his character embodies a man of true strength and bravery and like humbleness. And like he's like, every quality of the Norman character is just, it's incredible. To have Chadwick Boseman play that character was perfect. He delivers like all these powerful speeches throughout the film too. It's really, really great. But the star performance in this film for me is obviously Delroy Lindo, who plays Paul. I don't know this actor from much, but he looks very familiar. I think I've seen him in things. But he was the key like role in this, and he did a fantastic. He was the breakout role for me. Breakout, I say. I don't know. He was the best role for me. Best performance. He does an incredible job playing a PTSD-stricken Vietnam vet, and it's perfect because he is in many ways the protagonist of the film. I want to point out a moment that's both visual and performance-wise, and it's Paul's tracking shot before his death. Is an incredibly long. There's a long take of it. It's a tracking shot of just following Paul. He's walking towards us. He's towards the frame, and he breaks the fourth wall. and he talks to himself, but he's talking to us. And it was really brilliant and powerful. So I needed to shout that out. And it's right before he's killed off. It was really good. And there might be two moments there where we have that. It's tracking shot, fourth wall break, monologue, brilliant performance, brilliant visual choice, direction choice. It was really, really, really good. Yeah. Real quick, I want to point out something that was just fun. It was just fun to pick up on while I was watching it. So there's some small references that I really enjoyed in the movie. These are not things that if you don't know cinema history, like there's just things that you'd have to really know to have picked up on these things. The obvious one is the reunion here of two actors from The Wire. Clark Peters, who played Lester Freeman, and Isaiah Whitlock? Yes, Isaiah Whitlock plays Melvin. He played Clay Davis Jr. in The Wire. So to have that reunion was awesome, but also I want to be clear that while I was watching this, I was fucking waiting for it, dude. I was like, there's no way he's going to do it, but he fucking does do it. Dude. I was waiting for that famous Clay Davis line from Whitlock, and he does it in the movie. His character of Clay Davis from The Wire is famous for that line that he does, shit, right? And I'm like, there's no way he's going to do it in this. He does. He fucking I was waiting for it, and it was great when it happened because it was hilarious. It's right at like, it's after all this shit has happened. And then now, Otis just keeps giving out all their gold to people. And he finally couldn't take it anymore. And he does that famous fucking shit line. It was good. Aside from that, so those references you would really have to be a Wire fan to pick up on. Another little reference is when the Vietnamese mercenary who has them at gunpoint claims to be a law official. And our heroes asks, "Where's your official badges?" And he says, "We don't need no stinking official badges. We don't need no stinking..." And and this is a reference to the 1948 film Treasure of the Sierra Madre, which you would have had to have been a film school fucking nerd to know what that movie is. But it's a classic. And it's a movie about fucking going after gold and treasure. And it's a famous line that millions of fucking movies have referenced before. But it's, "Badges? We don't need no stinking badges." Had to have that reference to this movie. Had to have it. Loved seeing it. It was awesome. So those are just a couple little things I wanted to point out. My overall take on the film. Let's get into it. So there's a line in the film: "We've been dying for this red, white, and blue since the get." My overall take is that it deserves to be watched and rewatched because you won't pick up on everything all at once the first go round. Watch it, take it in, and watch it again because it's all the importance is heightened when you watch it again. It's a very thought-provoking film, and I'm sure I even missed some things. I'm sure there's shit I didn't even mention. So you should definitely watch it twice. I still think my favorite part of the whole film is all the historical moments like I said. Norman bringing the idea of this fight back to the beginning. He brings up Crispus Attucks. He brings up all the different historical points in which black people fought for their freedom in this country and fought in wars expecting to get that freedom and didn't get it. I think it's clear the true war being observed here is not the Vietnam War, it's the war against injustice. The film will resonate, and it'll age fucking beautifully over time. Other things I picked up on and want to point out, the themes are consistent. So there's things like brotherhood, there's fatherhood, sacrifice, courage. We get a lot of these moments. The more I think about it, I'm thinking about scenes. I really enjoyed this movie. It's also funny too. A lot of times, there's good humor in it. The characters are very memorable. These archetypal heroes that become like unique characters. Like Lee created like this new. He almost created like these new kind of heroes that you will see filmmakers try to pull from with their own stories over time. I also really like the way Lee approached the flashbacks in terms of the characters. So he keeps our main characters in their roles. I mentioned this briefly, but by keeping the same actors in the flashbacks, it adds a whole other element to it. We only get de-aging in this movie in two moments, and they're in like photos and in the beginning and at the end, right? This is to establish the obvious that they were all young men fighting in the war. Obviously, they were all the same age as Norman is when they fought in the war, but he keeps them old for the rest of the film's flashbacks because it connects that group to our main plot group, like I mentioned, one young guy and four old guys. But also allows the actors to immerse themselves even further into their characters. By having the actors play both time periods, they can embody the characters even further. So that's just like a little technical thing. Like performance wise, it helps the actors. So no young actors to fill their roles for those scenes. They still play themselves in those scenes. It was also cool how some of those scenes were shot. They were sometimes shot without showing our main characters' faces. And here's what I took away from that. So the flashbacks are less about them and more about Storm and Norman. So if the main plot is about the other four guys, if they're the main characters of the main plot, then Norman is the main character of the flashbacks. It's his story, the flashbacks. That's kind of how I took it. So sometimes, and especially in that scene when they find the gold, our other four bloods are framed in the shadows on purpose. All the lighting is focused on Norman. So the others were specifically lit to be in the shadows to express further this idea that Norman's the main character of the flashbacks. This is to heighten the idea of them, first of all, not being that old in those actual moments, and to make Norman the main character of the flashbacks. And then the music, dude. And then there's the fucking music. You want to feel like a Vietnam film. It had a Vietnam movie's feel with the music. The music is key to the feel of this film in general. They even sing a lot of times in the movie. Paul sings before he dies. Music was important. We got to talk about Paul. So, Paul is the most mentally fractured, and that plays to both their advantages and disadvantages in the film. Paul ended up being right about DeRoche. So his paranoia, his PSD paranoia, PTSD paranoia, it makes him not very trusting, and he ends up being right about DeRoche. He's the guy who ends up betraying them at the end. But also Lee had an interesting creative choice by making Paul the only Trump supporter. This is to say that the craziest one is the only one who would be a Trump supporter. That's just Lee's political position shining through in his art. Overall, it really was a hell of a cinematic experience, and on Netflix, nonetheless. To follow up with, to have Scorsese on Netflix and then Lee, Netflix is doing pretty fucking good. I don't know. I like I said, there's plenty of stuff I didn't pick up on. I'm sure you'll always pick up on things the more you watch. And overall, it's just a really powerful film. It's a very relevant for the time film. It's just a great movie. That's right. Great movie. So let's rate it. I give it an 8.7 out of 10. It was great. That's where we're at. Let's do our movie quote of the week. It's a famous line. The genre this week is war drama. And to make it easier, Vietnam War drama. you don't know what this is from, you haven't seen enough movies. The movie quote of the week is, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Come on, name that movie. Name that movie, people. It's a classic. It's one of the greatest films of all time. Name the fucking movie. And we're good. And we're good. Let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up. This was a good one. I like talking about this one because I thoroughly enjoyed the film. Next week I will talk quickly. It'll probably be a shorter episode. I needed something kind of newer. So like I said, with these streaming services having original movies, there's a lot to work with. I'm going to talk about Joseph Gordon-Levitt's latest from Amazon, 7500, next week. But in the meantime, you know the deal. Follow me, the Ben Morganti. Follow the show, Screen Preach. Check out my website at benmorgantistory.com. My latest project will be up there soon, another 2 weeks. You can find this Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Subscribe to BMS Studios on YouTube. Check out my brother's channel, J&J Customs. You really want to support the show, become a patron at Patreon. And yeah, that's where we're going to end it. Again, just let me know what you're watching, comments, all the good stuff. And have a cinematic week, everybody.